to be the nation's top diplomat took a few interesting twists over the long weekend. For some time, it did appear that Trump had narrowed his choice to the former Gotham City mayor and Trump loyalist Rudolph Giuliani, who has been aggressively promoting his own credentials for the post, and to Mitt Romney, the former Republican presidential nominee, and in the past a pretty vociferous critic of Donald J. Trump. Amidst Giuliani's frequent public self-appraisals, his chances, though, were said by several Trump sources to have diminished. Also, though, pushback against Romney from some other Trump supporters and aides, including a brazen series of rebukes from transition advisor Kellyanne Conway on the Sunday shows, sparked a classic Monday morning TV frenzy.
This seems like a pretty bitter internal battle that is going on in the transition team over the nation's top diplomat decision.
Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani remains a top contender. Former CIA Director David Petraeus and retired four-star General John Kelly are also in the running.
Mitt Romney potentially becoming the next Secretary of State. Rudy Giuliani, a longtime Trump loyalist, also thought to be a contender as well.
People who were closest to him throughout some of the toughest times in that campaign who don't like the idea of Mitt Romney just on principle and greatly prefer Rudy Giuliani.
Were Kellyanne Conway's remarks about Mitt Romney, were they sanctioned, or is Trump now angry with her?
If Trump chooses Mitt Romney, my thought was she's risking a lot, because what if he chooses Mitt Romney? What does that mean for her?
Everyone in Washington is scoffing. How dare she speak out of turn and without permission? But my view is how refreshing it is to see someone say what she really thinks on television.
The loyalists and those who work so hard for Trump say, man, this guy not only worked against you, but he threw you under the bus at every turn.
Kellyanne's sense that in Mitt Romney, you could have a Secretary of State who's presiding over something of a rogue agency is very real.
This is not saying that Mitt Romney's going to be Secretary of State. This is just saying Kellyanne Conway hurt herself yesterday by going rogue at the worst possible time.
Why would we think that Kellyanne is going rogue? Why don't we think that she's channeling Donald Trump, her boss, who for some reason has soured on Mitt Romney?
All right, so one of the non-Rudy, non-Romney contenders for Secretary of State visited Trump Tower today to talk about the job. How'd it go, General Petraeus?
I was with him for about an hour. He basically walked us around the world, showed a great grasp of a variety of the challenges that are out there and some of the opportunities.
That's actually true. Today he tweeted at greater length, quote, "If Cuba is unwilling to make a better deal for the Cuban people, the Cuban American people, and the U.S. as a whole, I will terminate deal." Mark, this is the first big news event of Trump's transition that is likely to have ongoing international implications. So how do you think the president-elect is handling this?
I mean, not horribly. I think he's leaving his options open. I think he's playing not just to the base of the Republican Party, or some of it, because the Republican Party's divided here, but I think he's also playing to his own instincts about kind of the style he wants to have, and particularly contrast with Barack Obama. But it does show that he's going to have, on this issue and a range of others, just a ton of running room. And one of the things they're thinking about is how much, with a big domestic agenda, how much they want to shake the world up in the first couple months of the administration by going on offense. Everybody's talking about he's going to be tested by China or tested by ISIS, whatever. There's some thought within the Trump camp of, on Cuba, on Iran, maybe some other areas, go big early and shake the world up.
There is no good reason, from the standpoint of a free market Republican or from the standpoint of a liberal Democrat, to go back and undo what has been done with respect to normalizing relations with Cuba. It is that's a thing that we took a long time to get there. It's not an Obama left-wing thing. Countless business people, Fortune 500 CEOs, Wall Street people, and free market economists have been arguing for it as the best way to help the Cuban people, to normalize, to liberalize the economy,
but not a lot of the base of the Republican Party. They don't agree with you.
I understand that, but Donald Trump's supposed to be the businessman president. Let's try to rule on the merits here.
I say he was leaving his options open to go with the Heilman policy.
I want to say let's rule on the merits. Let's stick with it here. We'll be right back to talk with two reporters about Donald Trump's transition and the aide that everyone is currently profiling. That would be Steve Bannon. Right after this.
Welcome back. Joining us now from Capitol Hill, NBC News correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, who's tracking every bit of the transition from there. So, Kelly, we're talking about 4 or 5 names or so for Secretary of State. One of them is Bob Corker, who was considered for vice president running mate for a time. What would Corker bring to this job? Why is he on a list with all these other very impressive people?
Well, at the moment, he is the senior-most foreign policy kind of responsible person on Capitol Hill, in that he is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That is a post which really allows him to speak to ministerial level officials from all over the world. And so he is constantly thinking about issues that are the same sort of portfolio as a Secretary of State. So he's got that. He's also, in his former life, was a real estate investor, and so he can speak Trump in that way as a businessman. And he's a traditional Republican who was among those early to come out in kind of quiet support of Donald Trump. He was not waving the flag so much, but he cited things that he thought were positive in Trump's policies and backed those. So that gives Trump and his sort of menu of choices someone from the traditional mold who's got a portfolio that would work. Think, you know, John Kerry, our current Secretary of State, was previously the head of the Foreign Relations Committee. So it gives you an idea of that portfolio matching up with the job that is currently open for a future Trump administration.
We are also going to bring in, to join Kelly O'Donnell, the Deputy Washington Bureau Chief for the Boston Globe, Matt Visor, whose latest piece is a profile of Donald Trump's controversial pick for White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon. Matt joins us from the Globe's newsroom in Washington, D.C. Matt, it's good to have you here. I have run in a crowd that has known Steve Bannon for a long time, and one of the things that's coming out of all these profiles is the notion that some of the more controversial things that he has been provided a platform for and has sometimes espoused, he may not actually believe. Tell us what your piece tells us about that question and what your reporting has revealed.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to many of his classmates at Harvard Business School, where he was for 2 years. And, you know, almost universally, people did not hear the type of rhetoric that's often associated with him now. There wasn't anti-Semitic language, racist language, anything like that during his time there. The conclusion that many of his classmates draw is that, you know, he's found a marketplace where there is a segment of our society that is interested in that type of rhetoric. Breitbart provides some of that, and Bannon has kind of used his skills at Harvard Business School to market towards some of that through Breitbart. But Bannon himself, a lot of those people believe don't believe those kind of things that are sometimes promoted on the website that he has been running.
Kelly, there was some concern on Capitol Hill at the time Bannon was named. People seem much more comfortable in the leadership, at least, with Reince Priebus. Are they adapting themselves? He's made some courtesy, at least phone calls up to the Hill. Are they getting more comfortable with the notion of being on Team Bannon?
Well, they can find comfort in saying that a president-elect should be able to choose those around him. Democrats very strongly against Bannon, citing all the things that you were just talking about that came out through that Breitbart kind of as his part of the Bannon economy, the clickbait Bannon, who wanted to have sort of things that would strike a marketplace where there are people who want to see those provocative ideas. Democrats still very uncomfortable. Republicans are saying things like they don't know him yet, and also looking for any strands that kind of build him up. So, for example, the RJC, the Republican Jewish Coalition, says they do not believe that Steve Bannon is anti-Semitic. So that's gone a long way in trying to sort of bolster him. Mostly, it has been avoidance or tiptoeing on the subject of Bannon, trying to kind of get behind the fact that there are many other jobs to be filled, and Republicans on Capitol Hill are sort of keeping their powder dry when it comes to Steve Bannon.
I want to come back to Secretary of State, and I've got a question for each of you. I'm going to start with you, Kelly, about something we were talking about earlier in the show, which is David Petraeus, and whether or not Petraeus would have he obviously has some vetting issues, but do you think, from your sense of Republicans on Capitol Hill, do you think those would be problematic enough to keep him from being Secretary of State, or would they be easily overcome if that was the way that Donald Trump went?
I think that there would be a lot of explaining that he made a mistake, he owned up to the mistake, he has paid a price for the mistake, and he's got a large portfolio of experience that is key to that position. So you would have some Republicans, sort of the McCain-Graham coalition, that would strongly support a David Petraeus in any foreign policy role. It is a challenge to get around the obvious that he was convicted of a misdemeanor related to passing secrets, especially at a time when there was so much question about what extent the Clinton email should be probed and investigated and so forth. And we're not even certain that's entirely over from a Capitol Hill perspective. So that makes it difficult. But in terms of the David Petraeus most lawmakers knew in their interactions, you get a lot of praise and a lot of respect for his service to his country and his knowledge about the issues that are really kind of front burner for anyone in that job going forward.
Matt, as a Boston Globe guy, I know you covered Mitt Romney, and you know a lot of people in Mitt Romney's world. Is there any growing sense among Romney allies right now that maybe Donald Trump is just toying with Romney and about to kind of publicly humiliate him?
That has been the concern, I think, in Romney world, is sort of how seriously to take this. They feel like, you know, they don't want Mitt Romney to be sort of set up for something. The meeting last week, 90 minutes long, sort of gave assurances that this was something more serious than just a staged meeting. Them having dinner tomorrow night is also an indication of some seriousness of this. But there still is a fair amount of caution in Romney world about sort of where this may lead. There's a hope that Romney is taken seriously by the Trump campaign because they believe that Mitt Romney would be good in that role. But there's still a little bit of skepticism, I think, in that among his supporters. Matt Visor writes for the paper of presidents, or at least presidential candidates. Kelly O'Donnell, NBC News. Thank you both for joining us. Good to have you back. We're going to talk with the editorial page editor of The New York Times about Donald Trump, the transition, the recount, and oh, so much more.
James Bennett joins us right after this. We're back. Really big shoe, joined on the set now by the editorial page editor of the New York Times, the king of 8th Avenue, James Bennett. It's 8th Avenue.
Never been called that before.
Right, it's 8th Avenue.
Never will be again.
It's 8th Avenue.
It is 8th Avenue.
You'll be called every time you come back on the show ever again.
That's
every
awesome.
time you come on.
So you hear a lot from people on the left who say the press must hold Donald Trump accountable.
Yeah.
And
do not normalize him.
Do not normalize him, but also, just hold him accountable. Lots of news organizations, including yours on the news side and on the editorial side, have, in many respects, investigative pieces, editorials denouncing certain things he does. You used to be a working reporter. What could the press at large do more than we're doing to hold him accountable?
This is a question we're asking ourselves, I think, all the time right now. I think the Times is certainly doubling down on its investigative capacity in Washington, and other papers, other news organizations are too, just because there's so many questions emerging about potential conflicts of interest and what's going to happen with his business interests, how that might influence foreign or domestic policy. I think there are a lot of questions we have to ask ourselves. About.
But just give me an example of one thing. Let's say the head of the top 15 news organizations in the country were called in and said, James, we want to hold him more accountable. We'll do whatever you say. What's one thing that people could do, news organizations, reporters, editors, producers, anchors could do to hold him more accountable?
Well, I think investing in investigative reporting is number one. But, I think the scary thing is what you guys were talking about earlier, which is the fact that he has his own giant megaphone, as he should, as the president-elect and now as president, and has this pattern of simply denying widely accepted reality. And in that environment, it's very, we're just kind of, we're in uncharted waters here.
Reporting, right? Times had an incredibly great piece over the weekend looking at his holdings in individual countries. Very long piece, overview, then broke it down market by market. There were tons of things in there that raised red flags. And yet, I have no sense that that's impacting Donald Trump's life in any way.
I agree with you. I think, we as journalists need to keep doing our jobs and doing them as well as we can, which means reporting the truth as we understand it, digging deeply, being fair, obviously, and trying to understand the man in full and his interests, his side of the story, too. But it's ultimately up to the citizens and how they receive and process those messages. And the voters spoke in this election. Editorial boards like mine were arguing for a different outcome. We didn't get the outcome that we were arguing for. And I think we do have to ask ourselves hard questions about how we should be reaching people, whether we're reaching them as effectively as we'd like to be in this day and age.
This is a very kind of conventional conversation that I'd like to make a little bit less conventional.
Sorry, that's my fault.
Do it all in pig Latin. It's totally my fault. It's not just because of the way you just...
Back it up.
No, back it up to the thing that you just said a second ago. So first of all, there is the great debate going on right now. You guys, there was a piece in the magazine about Reince Priebus this weekend, normalizer in chief or whatever. Normalization is now a big debate, right? So within the halls of the New York Times at the highest levels, is there a posture on this question? Should the press, what is the posture on normalization? It's clearly not. He's clearly not a normal president-elect. He's clearly doing all kinds of things that are breaking precedent every moment, practically, right? So what's the Times' posture with respect to? Does it have a posture with respect to normalizing this man as president? I
want to understand what we mean by normalizing. This is what I'm struggling with a little bit, because if by normalizing we mean denying the reality of the fact that this guy has been elected president, I don't think that's going to get us very far. If what we mean is that we shouldn't simply accept that it's normal for a president of the United States to have as many conflicts of interest as Donald Trump is entering office.
And to claim that it is impossible for a president to have conflicts of interest.
Yeah. I mean, again, he's quite cunning about all this stuff, and that's the way he articulates it. And he's got a point, by the way. But that it isn't the same thing as saying, therefore, he has no conflicts of interest that might be having a big impact on policy. So we can put a whole lot of things in a big bucket and call that normalizing the presidency, when in fact what we're doing is trying to report as aggressively as we can on what he's up to.
So last night, right, when Trump tweeted this thing about how he won the electoral college in a landslide, which he didn't, and then went on to say that he would have won the popular vote if it weren't for millions of people who voted illegally, which was just a lie, right?
Right.
There was a whole debate that broke out on Twitter about how to handle that, right? Because when he asserts things that are demonstrably untrue, and we reporters say that's demonstrably untrue, what you hear back from the Trump chorus of his supporters is, you guys are all biased, you're all biased. Yeah, and in some ways it strengthens him in the sense that by saying these things and drawing the rebukes from us that he draws, his followers then say, again, it's Trump against the world. The mainstream media is out to get Trump. In some weird ways, do you suspect that maybe he's playing a very cunning game by doing these things, by lying as overtly as he does, by saying that the sky is red rather than blue?
Yeah, I think he is. I think it changes the subject for him. It gets us all talking about something else. But I think it's possibly deeper than that, I mean, I do think there's this notion that, that's loose in the land, that's out there, that everything is kind of narrative, and it's the story you tell, and you have your version of the facts, and he has his version of the facts, and it's the same debate that we've been having around climate change, where the burden of the proof is all on one side, yet the other side continues to insist the case is improved. And I think it's a really scary question for the whole country. And we used to talk about spin, right? But spin was about an accepted version of truth, where you were just trying to put the best possible
within the 40-yard lines.
But now we're just like operating completely off the field, and he never, that I know of, ever says, oh yeah, I got that one wrong, or yeah, let me go back and do a do-over on that one. He just kind of moves on, and leaving us in his wake bickering about whether he was lying, whether the right word is lie.
As a factual matter, has the New York Times written a favorable editorial about Donald Trump since he became a presidential candidate?
I've got to give that some thought. We've certainly said favorable things about him, including about the boldness of his infrastructure plan when he threw a big number out there. And we've given we have in fairness, we've given credit to him for different positions that he's taken as a candidate.
Okay. All right.
But it's, in fact, the campaign's kind of a blur for me now, Mark.
All right. We'll look forward to next year and see what happens.
When I come back.
Okay, when you're back.
Some examples for you.
James Bennett, perhaps making his final appearance on this show. We shall see. Not because he wasn't great, because he was. Thank you, man.
Thanks, guys.
When we come back, John's interview with the Q-Tip, the abstract of the group, Tribe Called Quest. You're not going to want to miss it. And if you're watching the program in Washington, D.C., you can always listen to the show on the radio in the nation's capital at Bloomberg 99.1 FM on your radio device. We'll be right back.
This might turn out to be an evergreen headline, but the #1 Billboard album right now is We Got It From Here, Thank You For Your Service by Tribe Called Quest. It might be because it is a masterful reunion record, or it might be that its overtly political themes and lyrics landed with perfect timing just 3 days after Donald Trump's election, or because it features the final rhymes of the legendary Malik Fife Dog Taylor, who died in March. Or maybe people just love amazing hip-hop that is simultaneously gloriously old school and exquisitely modern. As millions of Americans, and especially those of color, are still coming to terms with what Trump's election might mean, Tribe Called Quest has given us their version of reflection and resistance in their first album in 18 years. But lyrics can only get you so far, so we were ecstatic when Q-Tip showed up here late last week for an extended conversation. We started talking about his appearance on Saturday Night Live the Saturday after the election, when guest host Dave Chappelle said he was willing to give Trump a chance if Trump would do the same for historically disenfranchised peoples. I asked Tip if he was willing to give Trump a chance too.
I guess we have no choice but to give him a chance, right? Because he's the president. But I think that, you know, it's just a lot of heightened probably disillusionment with him, because he's been a public figure for over 30 years. Yeah. You know, I think that the platform that he ran on is one of is very scary. It's extremely polarizing. It's divisive. It's not necessarily inclusive, and it's dangerous, and it's one that brings about a almost absolute fear. I wouldn't want to give someone like that a chance per se.
Yeah.
But the actuality of the situation is that he is the president, and people voted for him. Although I didn't vote for him, he is the incumbent, and he's my president now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I said before this record was unusually political for modern day hip hop, also unusually political for Tribe, right?
Yeah.
So the first song you guys did on Saturday Night Live was We the People. Yeah. That song's like the most popular song right now on Spotify off the record, and I thought it was fascinating. It was a great performance you gave, and immediately you saw people tweeting, "This is our new national anthem," right? Yeah. So I want to put the lyrics up back here, just because I want to ask you to unpack it a little bit and just tell me what you were thinking about. Just do me a favor. You don't have to. No, I'll do. You just give me the open here.
We don't believe you, because we the people are still here in the rear. Hey, yo, we don't need you. You're in the killing off good young mood. When we get hungry, we eat the same food. The chorus is, all of you black folks, you must go. All of you Mexicans, you must go. All of you poor folks, you must go. Muslims and gays, boy, we hate your ways. So all of you bad folks, you must go.
Just unpack that for me. How what you're bringing here.
It's not really for any musical thing. Seriously, it's really real. We don't have that much faith in our political figures, because time and time again, we see broken promises, broken agendas, lines drawn between different aisles of the party. We see a lot of infighting, and then you expect us to believe that you really have our best interests. Are you dialing back to globalization? Seems like it. Are you trying to have kind of like a real? It just seems like our interests as people are not really valued. Only at election time.
Right.
These things come up that are kind of pertinent and near and dear to us. So, and we're still here in the rear, yo, we don't need you. That line is really saying that we as people have to understand our power. We have to understand that, the president-elect, the former president, the whole cabinet, they work for us. And we put them in that office. Our monies pay their salaries. They are supposed to be representing our necessities and supporting our dreams. And the ideas and the principles of this country are not just some sort of flowery Hemingway preface. It's a real deal thing, and we hold you accountable. Yeah. And you're in the killing off good young mood. That's really speaking to what I believe to be the continuation of slavery. When slavery was abolished, then, you saw that it goes to Jim Crow, and then, you get to the civil rights movement, obviously, and then the prison industrial complex. And now that has been kind of front and center for over the past 20 years, you see lobbyists, you see a lot of, good energy surrounding the reversal of that. You just see out and out, horrific and, screened executions of black men.
But it's clear to me that, as you think about this record, that you guys were tapped in over the course of the year you were making it, or a little less than a year you were making it. You guys are tapped into the fear that a lot of non-white voters, a lot of non-white Americans feel right now. You were tapped into it early. There's a lot of expressions of it in the course of the record. It's part of, again, why I think the record's so resonant, right? So are you afraid right now of the incoming administration, that they're tolerant of racism, that things are going to get ugly and bad for communities of color? Is that something that worries you? And if so, what do you want to do about it?
There's going to be a lot of voters who voted for Trump that if he does not come through on what he ran on, that group is going to be very irate. Yeah. And there's already a group here who is the antithesis of everything that he ran for, who are scared, right? So you have fear and you have anger.
Yeah.
I think that's a cocktail that if it's not settled and dealt with in transparency and truth, and we don't know where you're shooting from, you continue to stoke that flame, it's going to wind up blowing up. I think it's going to be a problem. So do I fear for me? Do I fear for the people? No, because I think that people are so at the edge of their emotions that any kind of reservations that they have or where they're at are kind of long gone.
Yeah.
So I think it's this incumbent has a lot. He and his team has a lot on their hands, and they have to really. This is going to be, interesting to watch.
We'll have more from Q-Tip, including his thoughts on Kanye West, right after this. And now we're back with part 2 of our conversation with Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest. I'm asking about Kanye real quick, just because he's on the record, right? And not briefly, he maybe was going to be on, maybe a little more on the record. At least my reporting tells me. Yeah. He's now canceled his tour. He got hospitalized for exhaustion. He went on stage. He said he would have voted for Trump. Like, what do you make of that? He's a friend of yours.
Yeah, he's my brother. I just it's difficult, because I love him. It's my brother, you know what I'm saying? And I reached out to him, and I'm hoping that we just get to talk, And I just probably would leave it there because I really care about that dude. But his remarks are something that requires he and I having a real serious discussion.
Yeah. I want to go back to Fife.
Yeah.
This record's obviously, you guys had a reunion. You came back together after a lot of years of discord, right?
Yeah.
And then you came back together like a family and made this record. And now it's incredibly successful, So and it's made in his memory and made, in his honor in some respects. So is this like what has happened? Is this like enough in some way to have paid to pay tribute to him, or is there something else that you're looking for? Does this record have to do something else to get there? Or are you now satisfied that like you paid your tribute to your brother and this has now like elevated him to where he should be?
I'm totally satisfied, you know. But I think in a personal sense, I'm going to always crusade for him, you know, just because that's my boy and that's what we're supposed to do. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I'm just ecstatic about everything and the way that it's all unfolded. You know, like I remember looking at that picture. I remember that night, you know, we were, I think he was 18 and Ali was 18 and Jerobi was 17 and I was 19. I just had a birthday because the first album that came out. So just thinking thoughts like that, you know. Yeah. Just in a friend sense, in a brother sense, you know. I'm definitely happy that it couldn't have been scripted better. It's like a poetic justice, if you would.
Does it sadden you that he's not around to see it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
The selfish part of me wants him here.
You get a tour with the record?
I don't know. You know, people have been writing and asking about that.
Well, we all got questions. First of all, we want it, and second of all, we want to know who's going to do Fife's rhymes.
Yeah, but that's. I mean, if I don't know. I don't know.
Come on, you got some. You got some ideas. Make some news for me here. Come on.
I really don't know because it's hard to like really tackle that. Like that's my guy. He wouldn't be there. You know what I'm saying? How do we approach it? Yeah. Now the other part is you want to deliver it just because of the music and you want to move the music around and you want to give it to people and you want to share and exchange and then also what this record seems to be shaping up to mean to certain people and where we're at, you know, we should maybe take a lap, but I don't know.
I'm sitting here thinking in my head, who could do those Fife rhymes on the like it's hard to figure out.
You're angling.
No, I'm.
That's what it is. Would you come out?
You know, all you gotta do is ask, man.
So if we were to do a show,
I'll give it a shot.
Okay, let me ask you on television.
Yeah.
So if we were to do a show,
yeah,
and you're in the house,
yeah.
And
your microphone check. 1, 2. What is this? Yeah, I come out there. I do that.
Are you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Handshake.
A 5-foot assassin. I mean, I'm 6'5", so it doesn't really work. The 5-foot assassin.
You just flip it.
But I got the roughneck.
The 6'5" assassin.
But I got the roughneck business.
You got the roughneck business.
I do. I got it.
You need it when you call it.
Thanks to Q-Tip, man. That was great. A Tribe Called Quest new record is called We Got It From Here. Thank you for your service. It is #1, and we'll be right back.
When people hate you, eagle to make you violent, or govern like a tyrant, or switch your dictionary's word from vibrant to
John's full interview with Q-Tip is available to you now. If you have access to the World Wide Web, it's on BloombergPolitics.com. Next on Bloomberg Technology, the founder and CEO of Girls Who Code. Love Girls Who Code. Thanks for watching. We'll be back here tomorrow. Same bad time, same bad channel. Sayonara.
I'm Courtney Collins, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's get with a check of Bloomberg's first word news. President-elect Donald Trump met at Trump Tower today with retired General David Petraeus, a potential pick for Secretary of State. The former CIA director's name has been floated as an alternative choice for the position in the wake of escalating concern about Mitt Romney as an appointment. Petraeus spoke briefly with reporters, saying the meeting went well, but a decision by the next president is still very much up in the air.
I was with him for about an hour. He basically walked us around the world, showed a great grasp of a variety of the challenges that are out there and some of the opportunities as well. So very good conversation, and we'll see where it goes from here.
It's official. President-elect Donald Trump won Michigan, flipping the traditionally blue state by fewer than 11,000 votes. The state certified his victory today, nearly 3 weeks after the election. The 0.2 percentage point margin is the closest presidential race in Michigan in more than 75 years. And thousands of Cubans lined up near Havana's Plaza of the Revolution to mark the start of the week-long services paying homage to former President Fidel Castro. The White House says President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden will not attend the funeral. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Courtney Collins. This is Bloomberg.
And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, it is Cyber Monday. How a surge of web shoppers and promotions threaten the one-day shopping spree's 10-year reign. Plus, Donald Trump's Twitter habit. The next president of the United States has flat out refused to quit tweeting. We'll discuss what the fallout could be. And an open call for female coders. As the tech workforce celebrates unprecedented growth, there's still not nearly enough people to fill open jobs. Girls Who Code CEO Rasma Saujani joins us to sound the alarm under President-elect Trump. But first, to our lead. Cyber Monday sales skyrocket. Online shopping is on track to surge more than 9% from a year ago, according to Adobe. But the idea of a one-day online shopping extravaganza is fading because more U.S. consumers are choosing to skip the doorbusters and shop anywhere, anytime they want. Black Friday marked the first day in U.S. retail history with more than $1 billion in mobile revenue, a 33% jump from the year before. That's led some to suggest that this weekend was the moment when shopping on a smartphone officially went mainstream. Joining us now to discuss, Techonomy CEO David Kirkpatrick and our Bloomberg contributing editor, as well as Cowen & Co. Director of Research, John Backledge. John, I will start with you. Do you think Cyber Monday and Black Friday are already things of the past? And if so, why?
No, there's definitely still value. I mean, you see, like, I cover Amazon. I run the internet research group at Cowen, and you see Amazon's been pretty focused on, they're calling it like the 5-day period from kind of a Black Friday through Cyber Monday, and there's a lot of discounting that's done, and they get a lot of traffic and obviously a lot of sales. I mean, last Cyber Monday they sold 54 million items, but it is definitely more stretched out. You know, they're running Black Friday promotions for 33 days at Amazon, and it ends December 22nd. So I kind of agree that yeah, to a degree, it's way more. It'll be way more spread out over time.
David, you know I love my shopping. We know also that more Americans actually shopped over the weekend, but in fact spent less. You know, what do you think the implications of that are? And does it have to do with the fact that sales are just so steep now?
Yeah, I think it's pretty funny that Black Friday lasts 33 days. That's good. You know, I think you can't fight the inevitable tide of history, right? Convenience, pricing, selection, free delivery. Online is just a machine that's getting better and better oiled. There's innovation still coming from startups that are coming up with interesting new creative ways to get people interested, to aggregate new kinds of products and services. You know, there really isn't a good way that the offline, brick and mortar world can fight back long term. I think that doesn't mean that goes away, but I think we are seeing a fundamental shift toward online and convenience. Whether the overall sales are going to be affected by that, I think people do spend more when it's easier. So long term, I think it's good for the economy.
Now, John, you